In the American motorcycle world, price reflected not only the characteristics of a machine, but also the means of its owner. Some models were bought as everyday transportation, others were built for a completely different audience and cost considerably more than most production motorcycles. In this video, we'll look at the 5 most expensive production American motorcycles of the 20th century. Let's begin. Fifth place goes to the Victory V92C. This motorcycle appeared in the late 1990s when Polaris decided to enter a completely new market. By that time, the company was already a major manufacturer of snowmobiles, ATVs, and watercraft, but it had never built road motorcycles. Work on its first cruiser began in the middle of the decade, and a separate brand called Victory was created for the new venture. The production V92C was intended to compete not only with Japanese cruisers, but also with Harley-Davidson. The motorcycle was developed almost entirely from scratch. It received a proprietary 1,507 cubic centimeters V-twin engine with a 50-degree cylinder angle, air and oil cooling, electronic fuel injection, 4 valves per cylinder, and overhead camshafts. The engine was rigidly mounted in the frame, so a balance shaft was used to reduce vibration. It was paired with a 5-speed transmission and a belt drive to the rear wheel. The chassis was also developed specifically for the bike rather than assembled from components borrowed from other American motorcycles. Up front was a Marzocchi telescopic fork with 45mm tubes, while the rear used a single Fox shock absorber. Brembo supplied the front brake. Dry weight was about 289 kilograms, while seat height was roughly 71 centimeters. For a large cruiser, the bike handled reasonably well, and early tests particularly praised its suspension and stability through corners. However, the production engine was less powerful than the early prototypes. After final tuning and meeting emissions requirements, output at the rear wheel was around 55 horsepower. Production also got off to a difficult start because of delays involving some supplier components. Early bikes suffered from leaking fuel tank seals and taillights that could crack from vibration. Around 60 motorcycles had to be returned to dealers for corrective work. Despite the difficult start, Polaris was already preparing Victory for proper series production. The company established a dealer network of roughly 160 locations, while the initial target was between 1,500 and 2,000 motorcycles per year. By the end of 1998, around 1,500 examples had been built. This was no longer an experiment from a small workshop, but a genuine new motorcycle brand backed by a major American manufacturer. The V92C was priced at $12,995. For the first motorcycle from a completely new brand, that was a substantial price, but the project proved successful enough to continue. New cruisers and touring models soon followed, using the same basic engine, and Victory remained on the market for almost 2 decades. That makes the first generation V92C the 5th entry on our list of the most expensive production American motorcycles of the 20th century. Fourth place goes to the Harley-Davidson Heritage Springer. This model appeared in 1997 as one of the most expensive motorcycles in the Softail lineup. At the time, Harley-Davidson was making extensive use of styling inspired by its own motorcycles from the 1940s and 1950s, combining that look with modern technology. The Heritage Springer was created around exactly that idea. It looked like an old heavyweight Harley, but underneath the classic styling was a production chassis from the late 1990s. Its most distinctive feature was the Springer front end, with exposed springs and a link-style mechanism. For the new model, it was redesigned around a wide, 16-inch wheel, with several elements of the original design modified. At the rear was the Softail suspension system, with the shock absorbers hidden beneath the frame. From the outside, this made the bike look almost like an old motorcycle with no rear suspension at all. Deep fenders, wide white-wall tires, a large headlight, a fringed leather seat, and plenty of chrome completed the look. Power came from the familiar air-cooled Evolution V-twin with a displacement of 1,340 cubic centimeters. It was paired with a 5-speed transmission and belt final drive. By sport bike standards, the engine wasn't especially powerful, but it delivered plenty of low-end torque and suited the heavy cruiser well. The rigid engine mounting also preserved the characteristic Harley vibrations, which became especially noticeable as the revs climbed. The Heritage Springer weighed more than 300 kilograms, so nobody expected sport bike handling from it. The front end worked well on ordinary roads, but had relatively limited travel. Over larger bumps, the rear suspension could bottom out, especially with a passenger on board. In corners, low-mounted components could limit how far the bike could be leaned, while the front brake required considerable effort. But buyers weren't choosing this model for fast riding. The real product here was the styling. Harley was essentially selling a factory-built motorcycle that looked like a carefully restored machine from the past, without requiring its owner to maintain an actual motorcycle from the 1950s. For the 1997 model year, the company planned to build around 6,600 examples. Even with that production volume, the model was far from cheap. The factory price was $16,995. And in some states and at certain dealerships, the final price could be even higher. In the late 1990s, that was the kind of money that could buy a well-equipped car. Yet the Heritage Springer was produced for several years and wasn't a limited collector's edition. Its high price as a regular production motorcycle puts it in fourth place on our list. Third place goes to the Excelsior Henderson Super X. This motorcycle appeared in the late 1990s as an attempt to bring one of America's historic motorcycle brands back to the market. Brothers Dan and Dave Hanlon acquired the rights to the Excelsior Henderson name and decided to build their own production motorcycles, rather than relying on ready-made frames and engines from other manufacturers. A new factory was built in Belle Plaine, Minnesota, designed to produce several thousand motorcycles a year. The first production Super X motorcycles appeared in 1999. The model was developed almost entirely from scratch. It featured a steel frame and a proprietary 1,386 cubic centimeters V-twin engine with a 50-degree cylinder angle. The engine used electronic fuel injection, dual overhead camshafts, and 4 valves per cylinder. It was paired with a 5-speed transmission and belt final drive. The most distinctive part of the design was the front suspension. Instead of a conventional telescopic fork, the Super X used a girder-style setup with exposed springs that visually echoed the company's historic motorcycles. At the rear was a swing arm with a single shock absorber. The motorcycle was extremely large and heavy. Fully fueled, it weighed more than 360 kilograms, while its long wheelbase immediately marked it as a heavyweight American cruiser. The first production bikes quickly revealed several weaknesses. Owners and journalists complained about strong engine vibrations, a transmission that wasn't always easy to operate, and difficulty finding neutral. Some motorcycles were fitted with oil dipsticks that were too short. This could make a normal oil level appear too low, leading owners to overfill the engine. Some of these problems were addressed for the following model year. The crankshaft was rebalanced, the engine mounts were revised, and several frame components were strengthened. But the company's financial problems proved more serious than the motorcycle's technical shortcomings. Around $100 million was invested in developing the motorcycle, building the factory, and establishing a dealer network. The plan had been designed for a much higher production volume than actual sales could support. In total, roughly 1,900 production motorcycles were built. Early Super X models cost around $17,950, while later versions approached $18,500. For a new brand without an established reputation, that was a substantial price. In December 1999, the company filed for bankruptcy, and production was soon shut down. The Super X became the only production model of the revived Excelsior Henderson and takes third place on our list. Second place goes to the Harley-Davidson Electra Glide Ultra Classic. By the late 1990s, this model sat at the top of Harley-Davidson's touring lineup. The Electra Glide family had already been in production for several decades, but the Ultra Classic was designed as the most fully equipped version for long-distance travel with 2 people. In 1999, the motorcycle received an important technical update. The new twin-cam 88 engine replaced the older Evolution. The air-cooled V-twin displaced 1,449 cubic centimeters and used Harley-Davidson's traditional 45-degree cylinder angle. The engine received a revised lubrication system, updated cylinder heads, and a new valve train with 2 camshafts. The Ultra Classic also featured electronic fuel injection. Power was sent through a 5-speed transmission and belt final drive. The chassis was designed primarily for relaxed highway riding. Up front was a conventional telescopic fork with air adjustment, while the rear used 2 adjustable air shocks. The front wheel had dual disc brakes, with another disc at the rear. Dry weight exceeded 360 kilograms, making the motorcycle something that required care when maneuvering it at a standstill. Once underway, however, the low seat and low center of gravity made it considerably easier to handle. Much of the high price came from the equipment. The Ultra Classic came from the factory with a large fairing, two hard saddlebags, and a rear luggage trunk with a passenger backrest. Standard equipment included an audio system with a cassette player and rear speakers, a CB radio, an intercom system for the rider and passenger, and cruise control. Essentially, buyers received a fully equipped touring motorcycle that needed very little added before a long trip. On the highway, the design worked exactly as intended. The large fairing provided good wind protection, the suspension delivered a comfortable ride, and the engine produced most of its torque at low and mid-range speeds. At higher speeds, however, the limitations of the heavy chassis became apparent. Testers noted noticeable frame flex in fast corners and strong crosswinds, while the brakes had to bring more than 360 kilograms of motorcycle to a stop. In 1999, the factory price of the Electroglide Ultra Classic was $19,290. It was the most expensive motorcycle in Harley-Davidson's production lineup that year. Even without additional equipment, it cost considerably more than most large touring motorcycles from competing manufacturers. Yet the Ultra Classic was a full production model and remained at the top of Harley-Davidson's touring range for many years. That's why it takes second place on our list. The Indian Chief Limited Edition takes the top spot on our list. This motorcycle appeared in 1999 during another attempt to bring the Indian brand back to the market. After the original company shut down in the 1950s, the famous name was revived several times, but none of those attempts managed to establish long-term production. In the late 1990s, the new Indian Motorcycle Company began assembling motorcycles in Gilroy, California. One of its first production models was the new Chief. Its styling was based heavily on classic Indian motorcycles from the 1940s. The bike received deep valanced fenders, a large teardrop fuel tank, a wide leather seat with fringe, and the distinctive fender light at the front. Underneath was a steel frame with stretched geometry. Suspension came from a Showa telescopic fork up front and a hidden rear shock. Both wheels had disc brakes, while 16-inch spoked wheels completed the heavy, classic appearance. The revived company did not have its own engine yet. Instead, the Chief used an air-cooled S&S Superstock V-twin with a displacement of about 88 cubic inches. It was paired with a 5-speed transmission and belt final drive. Using an existing American engine allowed the company to start production much faster instead of spending several years developing its own power plant. The motorcycle was large and heavy. Its fully fueled weight exceeded 660 pounds, while the long wheelbase and wide tires defined its character on the road. The Chief was designed primarily for relaxed riding and long-distance trips. The low seat made it easier to handle at low speeds, while the large engine provided strong low-end torque. Technically, however, the motorcycle remained fairly conventional and offered little that was radically new. The first production run was limited to 1,100 motorcycles. Each bike received an individual numbered plaque, and the machines were sold through dealers as fully factory-built products from the new company. The limited initial production, expensive finish, and return of the historic name all had a major impact on the price. In 1999, the Indian Chief Limited Edition cost about $24,000. That was almost $5,000 more than the most expensive production Harley-Davidson of the same period. The Chief remained in production after the first run, and the model range gradually expanded. The company later developed its own engine, but the Gilroy factory survived only until 2003. At around $24,000, the Indian Chief Limited Edition takes the #1 spot as the most expensive production American motorcycle on our list.